And right now, I'd love to invite you to open a Bible to John chapter 11. John chapter 11. I love Easter. Now, I'm not the most expressive person. If anybody knows me, knows that about me. So I am painfully aware that people can appear more joyful than I am. They could appear more happier than I am. So when I'm excited, I just say I'm excited. I don't show that I'm excited. When I think something's funny, I'll smile, versus actually fall out of my chair. That happens once in a while, but not often. So when it comes to Easter, especially for people like me, it can feel like a lot of pressure to walk into a room like this where you're celebrating the resurrection of Jesus and to be like, I got to appear happy. I have to act like everything is good, And it's a joyful day. It's a celebratory day for Christians for obvious reasons that we've already been singing about. But even for people that aren't Christians, today is still a time that's often filled with great family time or egg hunts or parties and things like that. But life isn't a nonstop party, is it? Life is filled with tough moments. And I'm here this morning to tell you that is precisely what Easter is about. I don't know about you, but there are times in my life where I feel like things are going really good, where I feel like me and God are just tracking. And I want the things that He wants, and the things He's doing, I'm like, yes, that's great. That's just what I wanted, or that's even better than what I've wanted. But then every once in a while, something happens, and it creates this gap to where I look at God and I have this sense of like, wait a minute, I don't want this. I don't want this. I would just call these why God moments. Why God? I wonder if you've ever had a why God moment in your life. Maybe you felt like you needed Him badly, and you just felt like He wasn't there. Have you ever been there before? A couple sobering examples for you. Ted Turner, he's a very famous man. He started like CNN and TBS. He's a media mogul. He's made billions of dollars in his life. Many people don't know this, but in his 20s, he became an atheist. Before then, in his teens, he was a devout Christian man. He was actually a leader in his youth group. He wanted to become a missionary. But as a 15-year-old, his 12-year-old sister, Mary Jane, contracted lupus, which is a degenerative tissue disease, and she suffered horribly. And so often he would hear her screams, her cries of agony. He would see her get physically sick and throw up because of the pain that she was in. And so he would come home as a 15-year-old and hold her hand, and he would pray that God would heal her. But she did not recover. And when she passed away, Ted's dad, Ed Turner, said, if that's the kind of God He is, I want nothing to do with Him. Ted still held on to his faith barely, but not for long, because shortly thereafter, his dad, Ed, was under such grief that one morning he ate breakfast with his wife and went upstairs and took his own life. And it was then that Ted said, if that's the kind of God He is, I want nothing to do with Him. C.S. Lewis, you guys know C.S. Lewis. He wrote the Narnia books. He wrote a lot of famous books. He's quoted a lot. But in his life, he lost his wife to a painful bout with cancer. And he said, I can't understand why God is always there when things are going well. But then he said this, should be on the screen. But go to Him when your need is desperate, when all other help is vain, and what do you find? A door slammed in your face, and a sound of bolting and double bolting on the inside. After that, silence. You may as well turn away. The longer you wait, the more emphatic the silence will become. There are no lights in the windows. It might be an empty house. Was it ever even inhabited? It seemed so once. Why is God so present in our times of prosperity and so very absent a help in time of trouble? He equates going to God in his why God moment and feeling like the lights are off in the house. And you can hear the door bolting on the inside, and he's like, what's going on? Right? I mean, this was after he was a Christian. I know this doesn't make like the top 10 list of C.S. Lewis quotes or anything like that, right? Okay? But any genuine Christian at some point asks, why God? Maybe for you, it's not as heavy as that. Maybe for you, it's just the simple fact that your friends are all getting jobs, they're all getting promotions, but it's not working out for you. Or maybe you're approaching retirement and it's just not looking good. Or all your friends are getting married right now and you don't even have the prospect of a good date. Or maybe you're in your 40s and your husband just walked out. Right? Or your kids didn't turn out right and you thought, man, I thought I did everything perfectly. Or maybe you're like, kids, that'd be nice. We've been trying for a long time. Right? And to top it all off, it's Easter. And you come into this room and you're like, I have to act like everything's awesome. You know? In John chapter 11, what we're looking at this morning is two sisters who have their why God moment. Mary and Martha say today in our passage, Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. They each say it to him at separate times. It's a pretty honest statement. Their statement is basically code for where were you? Right? I mean, Jesus, do you care? And I'm here to tell you that you have three options when stuff like this happens in your life. Option one is you can lose your faith. You could set it aside like Ted Turner and Ed Turner. Option two, you can just isolate your question from your faith. And you could say, I can't lose my faith, that would be too painful, and so I'm just not even going to think about this thing, okay? I'm just going to avoid thinking about this thing. I'm not going to ask this question, but all that's going to leave you with is a very superficial faith. And you will never get to the place where you can actually love God with all your heart. It's not real. Or option number three is you can press in deeper into your faith. You can let your questions lead you to God. And I think as you begin to press in, when you start doing that, you stop saying, why God? And you start asking, what if? What if kind of questions. What if Easter actually proves that God really cares about your suffering? And even better, that he has done something about it. What if? We have four of them in our passage. The first one is in verses 1 through 16. Let's read it together. Now, a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and are you going there again? And Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him. After saying these things, he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he will recover. Now Jesus had spoken of his death, and they thought that he meant taking rest and sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died. And for your sake, I'm glad that I was not there so that you may believe. But let us go to him. So Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go that we may die with him. What we're seeing here is this first question that I want you to consider instead of just why God. Ask, what if? What if God does not waste your suffering? What if God doesn't waste your suffering? See, Jesus is out of the area with the disciples when he's told that his very good friend Lazarus is ill. We learn that he's really close with these people. He spent time with this family in their home. You can see that in verse 2. He loves Lazarus. He says that plainly in verse 3. He loves the sisters, says that in verse 5. And with all that in mind, we see Jesus' response to the news that Lazarus, his friend, is sick. It says in verse 6, so when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. What the heck, right? If you find out that someone you love is very sick and you're someone that's been wandering around Galilee healing people who are sick, right? If you really loved this family, you wouldn't stay longer, you would hurry, right? You would hurry over to help out, right? Well, it seemingly gets worse in verses 11 through 13. Jesus simply somehow knows that Lazarus has died, but the way he describes that to his disciples it confuses them. Right? He says Lazarus has fallen asleep, and so they respond, well, if he's just taking a nap, then he's fine, right? Why would we go visit him? But then back up in verse 8, they're well aware that Jesus is in danger, right? If you go back there, they're going to try to kill you, Jesus. Why would we go there, right? People are wanting you dead. So if he's napping, let's just relax. So Jesus has to be more direct in verse 14. He goes, hey, you guys, he's dead. He's dead. We need to go. And Thomas, the pessimist, says, or maybe the realist, if you're a pessimist, right? I guess we'll go die with him too. Here's his thinking. Jesus is about to die. If people want to kill him, we're going to visit a dead man. Well, we might as well go and die too, right? What a weird interaction all this is. I mean, is Jesus confused? Is he just bad at managing his time? You know, is he bad at making decisions like I am? If someone's like, where do you want to eat? I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know. I mean, there's so many options, and I just can't even come up with an answer, Or do you show up late and you're like, I just didn't plan out my life very well or something. Is that what's going on here? Well, no, look at the poise of Jesus. I know this is hard for us to hear, but he's allowing this to happen. To be clear, he's not creating their suffering. He's allowing it. That's how the Bible talks about these things. It's really important as we move through this story to think about how in any story there's always a protagonist and an antagonist, right? There's a hero and there's the enemy, there's the villain. In our story, I'm not going to bury the lead, Jesus is the hero, okay? He's the hero. And the enemy is an interesting one. The enemy is death. The enemy is death. Death has come into this world because of our sin. It's a part of the curse that sin brings. And Lazarus is experiencing that suffering, that pain, that curse. Jesus didn't create it. We did because of our sin, but he's allowing this to happen. Why? Well, Jesus says very clearly the purpose for allowing the suffering in verse 4, this illness is for the glory of God. It's so that the Son of Man may be glorified through it. Verse 15, I'm glad that I was not there so that you may believe. What Jesus is saying is that if he allows this to happen, somehow you will see Jesus more clearly. Somehow you will know Jesus more intimately. Somehow you will be blown away even more greatly by his glory. Right? So what if Jesus isn't wasting your suffering, but doing something glorious through it that could never happen if you hadn't gone through it? What if? I mean, he's God. He could have purposes and plans that I just don't understand. I mean, he's wise. He's so far beyond me. I mean, you guys, I'm 41 years old, okay? I'm an old man. And I have 4 kids. The oldest is 15, the youngest is 7. So at best, I have 26 years on my kids, okay, of life experience. And I've probably said this to you before, but they ask me questions all the time that are not even questions I don't even know the answer to. I'm just like, I've never even thought about that question. Like they'll ask me things all the time. Like my daughter, for example, will be like, can I have a cookie in the morning for breakfast? And I'll say, no, you cannot, right? We don't have cookies in the morning. And she'll say, why? And I'll say, I have no idea. Right? I don't know why we can't. We just can't. But you can have a donut, right? You can have a donut instead, right? You can do that. But I could say to her in that moment, because when you're a kid, life is just whatever's in front of you, right? And that's everything. So it's hard. I could say to him, I know it's hard, but you just trust me. Just trust me, right? What if God isn't wasting your suffering, but he's saying, just trust me? Even if he could explain it to you, like it wouldn't make sense, you know? Right, what if that was the case? Verse 17, but now when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, but Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give to you. And Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. But Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ. You are the Son of God who is coming into the world. So Jesus finally arrives in Bethany, which is just 2 miles outside of Jerusalem. Lazarus has been in the tomb 4 days. Apparently, this family and Lazarus were well loved because so many people are there. All these Jewish people are there coming to console them and grieve with them. And Martha catches wind that Jesus is there outside, and she runs out to meet him, but Martha remains seated in the house. She doesn't want to see him yet. And here's the key question. Again, verse 21. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. She looks at Jesus and she says, it's too late. It's too late. But then a caveat. But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give to you. She has faith even in the midst of her questioning. She's honest, yet she's suffering, and she hasn't thrown in the towel yet. So Jesus gives her an incredible promise if it's true, right? And a cruel promise if it's not. Your brother will rise again. And Martha thinks Jesus is being like theological or something with him. And she goes, yes, I know that he will rise again on the last day, right? We all believe that, right, as Jewish people. But she's thinking the end. Jesus is thinking much, much sooner than that. See, Jesus doesn't just say that he will bring about the resurrection or that he will be in the cause of that resurrection. Even though both of those things are true, he says something way stronger. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live, and everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Martha, do you believe this? To never die doesn't mean that you will just never die. It means that when you do die, if you believe in Jesus as the resurrection and the life, that you will triumph over death. That it will not be victorious over you because you've believed in the one who is the resurrection and the life. So in some amazing way, that tomb that you would enter is transformed into a womb, and you will rise again as a resurrected person. So here's our question. What if in your suffering Jesus really is enough? What if he really is enough? I find it so interesting about the story is Martha's upsetness. Jesus doesn't say to her, hey, hold on a second, I got a trick up my sleeve. Go call Mary, get her out here. I'm going to let her know what I'm going to do, right? No, Martha doesn't go to Mary and say, hey, Jesus is going to come out and he's going to raise Lazarus. That's not what she understands. In that moment, when this worst case scenario happens, in the face of her question, Jesus just simply offers her himself. You see that? Nothing has changed about her circumstance. Lazarus is still in the tomb. Right? The realities you hope in, Martha, are actually in me. They're in me. I am the resurrection. Am I enough? Am I enough? What if in the face of your own suffering and grief, Jesus is really all that you need? What if? Corrie ten Boom, quoted her many times. She suffered more than probably all of us combined in this room. I don't know. As she tried to hide Jews during the Holocaust and then was found out for that and put in a concentration camp and suffered horribly. But this is what she once said. She says, you never know that Jesus is all you need until Jesus is all you have. Until he's all you have. Sometimes when things are taken away from us and we experience the loss and the grief of that, those are often the places where we know I still have Jesus. And he's what I need. Martha wants her brother back, but Jesus says, I'm here. You want whatever it is back, but Jesus says, I'm here. What if the door, as C.S. Lewis said, isn't locked from the inside? What if the lights aren't actually turned off? You're just at the wrong house. What if? Thirdly, our third what if question is what if, in the midst of your suffering, Jesus shares in it? Verse 28, when she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, the teacher's here, he's calling for you. And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus wept. So the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them says, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying? So here Martha goes to her sister Mary and says, Jesus wants to talk to you. She quickly runs to him. She falls at his feet. She asks the same question, where were you? The people confirm what everyone's thinking. If he could heal all the other people, why not heal the person he loves? He then looks at her. He doesn't talk about resurrection, though, doesn't he? He doesn't go, I am the resurrection and the life. He doesn't say that, does he? He sees her weeping. He sees the Jewish people that have been following Mary to console her weeping, and he's deeply moved. He's greatly troubled. He then simply asks where the tomb is, and then potentially, in one of the most fascinating verses in the whole Bible, it's the shortest verse at least, John 10:35, we read, Jesus wept. Jesus wept. I wonder if you can picture him right now sitting there with her. It's like a real story. This really happened. He's fallen at her feet. She's fallen at his feet. Where is he? Jesus weeps. Jesus weeps. He's sharing in her grief. I mean, there's something powerful that this story offers us, understanding that God hates suffering. He hates death. He hates the sorrow that it brings because he hates sin, which has cursed this world. And Jesus is seeing here the effects of that sin. And he's deeply moved. Literally, the word is the word to snort, like a bull snorts. Not that I've ever been in a ring with a bull, but it'd be a terrifying thing. It's like come on, like a real, let's do this kind of thing, right? He snorts at death, and he simultaneously weeps. Right? These are near opposite emotions that are showing you two sides of Jesus, right? Of how he's dealing with this moment. And so it leads us to wonder, what if in that moment where you are having your why God experience, that Jesus were right there with you? That he weren't standing on the sidelines, just going, man, what a bummer to be you, right? What if? I think this is so powerful because it's often in our why God moments where we think of God as being removed from us. right? We think the doors are locked and the lights are off, Again, in this story, the sisters are asking this question, where were you? Because he literally wasn't there. But then here he shows up, and his response is not to patronize them. He doesn't say, well, yeah, I feel bad for you, right? He isn't removed from the situation. He chooses to enter the situation, right? He's not like the football coaches that I had growing up, All the football coaches I had growing up, at least where I did in Montana, they just wanted to kill you with all the drills and exercises and to be hot and you're sweating and we're feeling sick and all of our coaches were kind of like grown men. They were kind of overweight like me, stuff like that. And they're just yelling at us, do it again, run another lap. And I had so many times where I was like, I'd like to see you do it, I'd like to see you get out here in this heat and do it. That's why I quit football. It was too hard, We could picture God like that. Like he's just living in paradise. Oh, it's perfect up here. Man, look at all the suffering you guys are going through. That's a bummer. You did that, right? No, you sinned. Run it again, But what if God is actually not a distant God? Right? He doesn't distance from you in your suffering. No, that's not the case, right? Because God is intimately connected with his people. I mean, just one short instance from the Bible. When Saul is persecuting Christians, Jesus approaches him on the road to Damascus, and what does he say? Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? I say, why are you persecuting my people? I don't like seeing them go through that. Why are you persecuting me? He identifies with his people. I mean, just another example, if you're a parent and you see your child going through something so hard, and someone goes up to you and says, how are you doing? You don't go, well, I'm great, but my kid's not doing well. No, you go, I'm terrible, right? Because you know that connection. That's your child, right? Or maybe it's your friend, or your mom or dad or something, right? When someone goes, how are you doing? You're like, not good. This is a really hard time, God is so connected to his people. Even Jesus is connected. Grief is awful. And if you were to say that to Jesus, he would shake his head and go, yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Because he shares in that. But this then leads us to the climax of the story and our last question, right? What if he not only didn't waste it? What if he not only wasn't just enough? Right? What if he not only was with you in it? But what if God would finally put an end to your suffering? What if he would finally put an end to your suffering? And this is what Easter is all about. Verse 38, then Jesus, deeply moved again, he's snorting again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, take away the stone, Martha. The sister of the dead man said to him, Lord, by this time there's going to be an odor, for he's been dead 4 days. And Jesus said to her, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. Do you know anybody with that kind of power? Do you know anybody with that kind of power, with that kind of control, with the ability to speak, and someone who's dead for 4 days, to where Martha's like, it's going to be stinky? Right? 4 days, walks out. Someone once said, if Jesus had not said the name Lazarus, all the dead would have come out of the graves. So he names him. Lazarus, come out. Think about this. Witnesses saw this. There's so many people there. This is not like a private miracle, okay? So many people are there. Witnesses saw it. They wrote it down. A guy died was dead for 4 days, someone yells his name to come out, and he does. Right? What do you think about that? I mean, this is the event that's going to be the final straw for Jesus. In verse 53 of the same chapter, it says, from that day on, people made plans to kill him because they were worried about all the influence he was getting. But also in verse 45, we see people now believing in a way that they've never believed before. Right? This is amazing, but you want to know what the bummer is? Right? He's done something about their suffering. This would be elation, right? Lazarus would come out of the grave. Oh, everything's better again. But then he was going to die again. He'd still go back in that grave again. That's the weird thing about our suffering, isn't it? The things that we go, God, fix this. Right? Bring this back. Heal this. Replace this. Those are great things, aren't they? But they would be temporary fixes, wouldn't they? Wouldn't we just delay the inevitable? I mean, that's what he's doing, right? I mean, Lazarus is going to die again. It's just delaying the inevitable, isn't it? Not to be too depressing on Easter, but isn't that the case? So what's going on here? Well, this is what John calls a sign. Him raising Lazarus from the dead is called a sign. It's a miracle. It's a signal to point you to something, right? The sign is pointing you to something real, something true, something that's the substance, right? Remember Jesus' words, I am the resurrection and the life. He's not raising Lazarus merely to demonstrate his power over our suffering. He's telling us and showing us what he's going to do about it. Right? This sign is pointing us to Jesus so clearly, who is so unlike us, isn't it? Right? It's so important that we get this. So important. Right? Because let's just say you've never been to Disneyland, okay? Or I'll say I've never been to Disneyland, okay? And I bought tickets. I got all the kids. We got all these things, we got all this stuff packed, and we drove all the way to Disneyland, probably not today because it's bad weather, but maybe tomorrow or something, We go to Disneyland, we're so excited, let's just say we've never been, and we get up to the entrance, and there's a big sign that says Disneyland, and we're like, oh my gosh, we're here, we're at Disneyland, we've never been, this is so amazing, and we got out our phones, and we took a bunch of selfies as a family, and maybe someone says, hey, can I take your picture? We go, yes. And they took our picture and all this kind of stuff. And then we got the pictures, and we go, this is perfect. Wow, this is great. And then we left. And then everyone's like, what'd you do over the spring break? We're like, well, we went to Disneyland. They're like, well, how was it? You're like, it was nice. They're like, oh, did you like Thunder Mountain Railroad and all those? And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. We went, we saw it, it said Disneyland, right? We took a picture, it was great. Right? But we didn't do anything else. Like, man, you totally missed the whole thing, right? I mean, that's just the sign. It's just telling you where to keep going, right? You haven't really arrived yet until you actually enter the park and do the things, right? We get what signs are. Okay, we understand how silly that would be. It'd be so silly for us to read this story and not get to the conclusion, right? Who is Jesus? Who's not like you and me? Because he didn't run away from suffering. He ran towards it. He was a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, your grief, the Bible says. He was afflicted. He willingly experienced the most uncomfortable, grief-stricken moment when he suffered as he was crucified on the cross. He experienced death in fullness. But 3 days later, God called his name. And he got up from death, and he walked out of the grave. This is why, when you read the end of your Bible, John, who wrote this book, he wrote a book called Revelation, and John sees a vision of him, and he falls at Jesus' feet, terrified. Resurrected Jesus. You know what Jesus said to him? He says, don't be afraid. I am the first and the last. I'm the living one. I was dead, but look, I am alive forever and ever, and I hold the keys of death and Hades. He is alive, and he never went back into that grave again. It wasn't a temporary fix. It fixed everything permanently. Right? And so John is saying, let's take the worst case scenario now, and let's just throw verse 25 into it. All your why God moments, let's just throw verse 25 into it. And what if in the most dreadful moments of your life, we don't just go, why God? And we don't even just go, what if? We begin to say, if Jesus is the resurrection life for us, we begin to say, even if this happens, Jesus is the resurrection and the life. Even if this next thing happens to me, Jesus is still the resurrection and the life, right? Right? He's ultimate. He's gone into the grave and he's come out the other side, and this will completely change your life as a person if you really believe in him. Tim Keller, who recently, not like his last year, died of cancer. And before he passed away, as he was towards the end of his life, he was interviewed and asked about the hope that he had. And this is what he said. He said, if Jesus Christ really rose from the dead, then whatever you're worried about, whatever you're afraid of, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. If this is you, you're going to be a whole different kind of person walking around this world. You will be alive in such a unique way, but not in a way that you're going to face suffering and just always look for the silver lining, or you'll go, oh, the glass is half full, or look on the brighter side of life. No. You will face crisis, and it will not be fun, but you will be able to trust God in it, knowing that he is the ultimate reality now. And because Jesus rose, Easter is the story of the world, and he will put an end to it. He will put an end to it. This is what Easter's all about. So I'll leave you with this. Same book I just mentioned, Jesus saying to John, the very end of your Bible, this is what Easter has changed. I saw a new heaven, and I saw a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, all that curse. And I heard a loud voice saying, look, God's dwelling is with humanity, and he will live with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and will be their God. And here it is. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Grief, crying, and pain, no more, because the previous things have passed away. And then the one seated on the throne who is alive said, look, I am making all things new. Why is this true? Because Jesus is the resurrection of life. Because he's alive. Because he's alive. So I just humbly ask you this morning, do you believe this? Do you believe this? Do you believe this?